let's jump right in. We're going to be taking a deep dive today into something called configuration hiding rules. Now, you sent me over some documentation on this, and honestly, at first glance, it looks a little bit dry.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling once we really get into it, this is going to be some really interesting stuff.
It's one of those things that's way more exciting than the name suggests.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
absolutely.
It's like this secret weapon for user-friendliness and efficiency.
Yeah, and I love that you say secret weapon because
Yeah.
this isn't something that's flashy that's going to be, front and center. This is all happening behind the scenes.
Exactly.
To make things run more smoothly.
It's all about making information appear or disappear on command.
Yeah.
So the user only sees what's relevant to them at that moment.
Okay, so it's kind of like a super efficient filing system. Only the documents you need at any given moment are visible.
Exactly.
Love that analogy. But let's back up for a second and make sure we're all on the same page. Can you give us like a clear, concise explanation of what exactly configuration hiding rules are?
Okay, so at their core, configuration hiding rules let you control what a user sees during a configuration process. They're made up of two main parts: a condition and an action.
Okay, so like, if this, then that.
Precisely.
Got it.
So for example, let's say you're configuring a new phone online.
Okay.
You pick the color you want, and then suddenly, only the storage options available for that color appear.
Oh, I see. So in that case, the condition was me choosing the color, and the action was revealing the right storage option.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay, cool. So it's like a choose-your-own-adventure.
Right.
But for configuration. You make a choice, and the system adapts in real time.
That's a great way to put it.
But why is this such a big deal? How does it actually make things simpler for users or developers?
Well, imagine trying to cram every single possibility into a single configuration flow. It would be overwhelming for the user.
Yeah.
And a nightmare to maintain.
Totally.
Hiding rules let you streamline things. You only show what's relevant at each step, making the whole process much smoother.
Yeah, you know what that reminds me of is those old school choose-your-own-adventure books. Like if you wanted to see all the possible endings, you'd have to like keep flipping back and forth and back and forth. And this is kind of doing that automatically for you in the background.
Right. And the document actually gives an example of how it can drastically reduce the number of flow rules needed to manage a complex configuration.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about making things look prettier. It's actually making the entire system more efficient.
Exactly.
Interesting. Now, speaking of efficiency, I noticed the document mentioned AJAX hiding rules. Can you explain what AJAX is in this context and why it matters for these rules?
So AJAX, it stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Yeah. But honestly, you don't need to worry too much about the technical details.
Yep.
What's important is what it does. And in this case, AJAX makes these hiding rules work instantly.
Really?
Like magic.
Oh, wow.
The moment the condition is met, the action happens. No page refresh, no waiting.
So it's happening in real time.
Yeah.
As the user's interacting with the system.
Exactly.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. But are there any limitations to what AJAX can do with these rules?
There are a few limitations. For example, AJAX can't hide tabs themselves.
Oh, interesting.
So even if all the content within a tab is hidden, the tab itself will still be there.
Got it. So it's like it can control the contents of a room.
Right.
But it can't make the room itself disappear.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, I also noticed the document mentioned recommendation messages, and it sounds like those can work in conjunction with AJAX. Can you explain how those two concepts play together?
Yeah, so recommendation messages are like helpful hints that guide the user toward the best configuration choices. And what's cool is that AJAX can instantly update those messages based on the hiding rules.
Hold on, so even though the recommendation messages themselves aren't AJAX-driven,
right,
they can still be updated instantly because of AJAX.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's like the messages are these little chameleon creatures. They adapt to the changes made by the hiding rules in real time.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. So we've got conditions, actions, AJAX magic. It's a lot to keep straight. Are there any like rules of thumb or best practices for using these hiding rules effectively?
Yeah, the document offers some great tips. For example, it suggests that AJAX rules are a perfect fit for things like search flows and model configuration pages.
Okay.
But if you're working with a standard wizard-style interface, AJAX might not be the best choice.
Got it. So it's about using the right tool for the job.
Exactly.
Are there any other performance considerations we should be aware of?
Absolutely. The document emphasizes that AJAX should be used with caution when you have complex actions involved, because it can lead to performance issues.
So you're saying if the action triggered by the rule is really complex and requires a lot of processing,
Right.
then AJAX might actually slow things down.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's all about finding the right balance between responsiveness and performance.
Yeah.
Got it. So we've covered the basics of how these rules work
Mhm.
and when to use AJAX. Now, the document also delves into the administration side of things. What can you tell us about that?
Well, let's start with the process of creating a hiding rule. The document provides a step-by-step guide, but honestly, it's not rocket science.
Okay.
Think of it like creating a new recipe.
So I like where this is going.
You start with a blank slate and add ingredients one by one.
Got it.
First, you give your rule a name, like hide advanced options,
Okay.
and then you specify when it should be active. This is where the condition type comes in.
Okay, I see always true, simple condition, and advanced condition listed as options. Can you break those down for us a little bit?
Sure. Always true means the rule is always active, no matter what.
Okay.
Simple condition lets you set triggers based on specific attribute values, like in our phone color example earlier, and
Yeah.
advanced condition. It gives you the most flexibility. You can use something called BML to create custom functions that determine when your rule should be active.
So you can really fine-tune the logic behind the rule to fit your specific needs.
Exactly.
Wow, that's really powerful. So once you've set the condition, what's next in our recipe?
Then you decide what you want to hide. It could be a single attribute, multiple attributes, or even entire groups of attributes.
Got it. So it's like having this amazing level of control
Yeah,
over what the user sees.
exactly.
I love it. Now, there's also this concept of an associated recommendation rule. What is that all about? And how does it relate to hiding rules?
So imagine you're building a custom computer,
Okay.
but there's certain parts that just won't work together. Like maybe a specific motherboard is only compatible with certain types of RAM.
Right.
Hiding rules can help prevent those kinds of mishaps.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, let's say you have a hiding rule. That makes certain RAM options disappear based on the motherboard you select.
Okay.
But what if the user has already chosen RAM that's no longer compatible?
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
An associated recommendation rule can step in and automatically adjust those selections, preventing a frustrating error down the line.
So it's like having a configuration guardian angel
Yeah.
looking out for you, making sure you don't accidentally break anything.
Precisely.
That's really clever.
Yeah.
But how do you actually go about creating this dynamic duo of a hiding rule and its associated recommendation rule?
It's actually pretty straightforward. When you're setting up your hiding rule, there's a button that lets you add an associated recommendation rule right then and there.
Oh, so it's like a built-in feature.
Exactly.
Awesome. So we've got our hiding rule all set up, and now we're ready to add its trusty sidekick, the recommendation rule. What kind of information do we need to provide for that?
Well, just like with the hiding rule, you give it a name, and then you define the conditions that trigger it. This is where you can tap into something called the config operation context.
Oh, yeah, the config operation context. That sounded like a really cool feature. Can you
Yeah.
remind me what that's all about?
Yeah, so think of it like a detective's notebook. It tells you exactly how the configuration process started. Was it a brand new configuration, a modification to an existing one, or something else entirely?
So it's like providing context for the configuration.
Exactly.
Wow.
That makes sense. And you can use this information to make your rules even smarter. For example, you might want a certain recommendation to only fire when a user is modifying an existing configuration, but not when they're creating a new one from scratch.
Interesting. So you can really fine-tune when and how these recommendations appear?
Precisely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've defined the conditions for our recommendation rule. What about the actions? What can we actually make it do?
You have a couple of options. You can go with a standard action, which lets you pick and choose attribute values.
Okay.
Or you can use a table lookup action, which pulls values from a predefined table.
So it's like choosing between a manual and an automatic setting.
In a way, yes.
Okay, and I also see there's a set type to choose from. None, set, and forced set. What's the difference between those key?
Think of it as a spectrum of control. None is like a gentle suggestion. Set is a bit more assertive. And forced set makes sure the recommendation is followed, even if the user tries to change things.
So forced set is like the ultimate configuration enforcer,
Exactly.
making sure everything stays on track. I like it. So once we've set all these parameters for our recommendation rule, we're basically done, right?
Yeah.
We've created this powerful duo, a hiding rule that keeps things clean, and a recommendation rule that ensures everything works smoothly behind the scenes.
Precisely.
This is all starting to make a lot of sense. It's like we've unlocked the secret to creating a truly user-friendly and efficient configuration experience.
That's the goal.
Now, I did notice the document has a notes section at the end. What are some of the key takeaways from that section?
One important thing to note is that deleting a hiding rule doesn't automatically delete its associated recommendation rule.
Oh, really?
They can exist independently.
Interesting. So even if you get rid of the hiding rule, the recommendation rule can still live on.
That's right.
Huh. That's good to know. And vice versa. If you delete the recommendation rule, the hiding rule will keep working. Okay, so they're like partners in crime, but they can also operate solo if needed.
Exactly.
That makes sense. It gives administrators more flexibility
Yeah.
in how they manage these rules. Anything else in the notes that stands out to you?
Let me see. Well, one thing that caught my eye is the note about how groups collapse when all the attributes within them are hidden.
Oh, that's interesting. So if a group is empty because all of its attributes are hidden,
Right.
it just disappears.
It basically folds in on itself.
Like a deflating balloon.
Exactly.
It's a nice touch.
It keeps the interface clean and uncluttered, especially when you're dealing with complex configurations.
Absolutely. It's like the system is tidying up after itself,
Right.
making sure everything looks neat and organized.
Precisely.
And that really highlights the fact that these rules aren't just about functionality. They're also about creating a better user experience. That's really cool.
Another point worth mentioning is the importance of using auto-update settings for condition attributes.
Okay.
This makes sure that your hiding rules are always working with the most up-to-date information.
So it's like keeping the lines of communication open so the rules can react instantly to any changes.
Exactly.
Got it. This has been a really fascinating deep dive so far.
Yeah.
I feel like I've gone from feeling a bit intimidated by these rules to actually being excited to start using them.
That's great to hear.
I think the document does a really good job of explaining the concepts and providing practical examples. But before we wrap up this first part, I'm curious to get your thoughts on what are some of the potential pitfalls or challenges that people might encounter when working with these hiding rules?
That's a great question. One thing to watch out for is unintended consequences.
Like what?
Well, sometimes you might create a hiding rule that works perfectly in one scenario, but then it causes unexpected problems in another scenario.
So it's like a ripple effect, where one small change can have unforeseen consequences.
Right.
So how do you avoid that?
Thorough testing is crucial.
Okay.
You need to test your rules in as many different scenarios as possible to make sure they're behaving as expected.
So it's like doing a dress rehearsal
Yeah.
before the big performance.
Exactly.
Want to make sure everything runs smoothly.
And that there are no surprises.
Makes sense. Any other potential pitfalls we should be aware of?
Let me think. Well, another challenge can be managing complexity.
Okay.
As your configuration process grows, you might end up with a lot of hiding rules.
Yeah, I can see that happening.
And if those rules aren't well organized and documented, it can become difficult to maintain them.
So it's important to have a good system in place for naming, organizing, and documenting your rules. That makes a lot of sense. Well, this has been a really insightful conversation. We've covered a lot of ground, but we've only just scratched the surface. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll be exploring some more advanced concepts and techniques for using configuration hiding rules. So stay tuned.
I'm looking forward to it. Okay, so last time we left off talking about associated recommendation rules.
Right, those configuration guardian angels.
Exactly.
Making sure we don't make any mistakes.
Yeah, and we were about to dive into how to actually create those.
Right. So we've got our hiding rule all set up, and we're ready to add its trusty sidekick, the recommendation rule.
Yeah.
What do we need to do?
Well, it's actually a lot simpler than you might think.
Okay.
When you're setting up your hiding rule, there's a handy little button that lets you add an associated recommendation rule right then and there.
Oh, so it's like built right into the interface.
Exactly. It's all integrated.
Love it when things are easy like that.
Me too.
Okay, so you click the button, and what happens next?
Well, just like with the hiding rule, you give it a name. Something descriptive, like suggest compatible RAM.
Got it.
And then you get to define the conditions that trigger it.
Makes sense.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Oh.
Because you can tap into something called the config operation context.
Yeah, the config operation context. Remind me what that's all about again?
Think of it like a detective's notebook.
Okay.
It tells you exactly how the configuration process started.
Right.
So was it a brand new configuration? A modification to an existing one? Or something else entirely?
What gave you that backstory?
Yeah.
The context for the configuration.
Exactly.
That's
right.
pretty cool.
Sure.
So we can use that information to make our recommendation rules even smarter.
Exactly.
So for example, We could have a recommendation that only fires if the user is modifying an existing configuration,
Right.
but not if they're creating a new one from scratch.
Precisely.
That's a really nice level of control.
Yeah, it lets you be very specific about when and how your rules are applied.
Love it. Okay, so we've defined the conditions for our recommendation rule. And what about the actions? What can we actually make it do?
So you have a couple of different options here.
Yeah.
You can go with a standard action,
All right.
which lets you pick and choose specific attribute values.
Okay.
Or you can use a table lookup action,
Mhm.
which pulls values from a predefined table.
So it's kind of like choosing between a manual and an automatic setting.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then I also see there's a set type to choose from: none, set, and forced set. What's the difference between those?
So the set type determines how strongly the recommendation is applied.
Okay.
Think of it as a spectrum of control.
Got it.
None is like a gentle suggestion.
Sure.
Set is a bit more assertive,
Right?
and then forced set. Well, that makes sure the recommendation is always followed, even if the user tries to change things.
So forced set is like laying down the law.
Exactly.
No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
It's the ultimate configuration enforcer.
I love it. So once we've set all these parameters for our recommendation rule, we're
Mhm.
basically done right.
Pretty much, yeah.
We've created this amazing dynamic duo. Our hiding rule keeps things clean and simple for the user, and our recommendation rule is working behind the scenes to prevent errors and ensure a smooth configuration process.
Well, that's the idea.
It's like we've unlocked the secret to creating a truly elegant and user-friendly configuration experience.
That's the goal.
Now, I remember at the end of the last part, we were talking about the notes section of the document, and you mentioned a couple of interesting points. Is there anything else in those notes that you think is worth highlighting?
Let's see. Well, one thing that really stood out to me was the note about how dynamic hiding of attributes relies on auto-update settings.
Oh, yeah. I remember we talked about auto-update earlier in the context of making sure the hiding rules have the most up-to-date information.
Exactly.
But how does that apply to dynamic hiding specifically?
Well, imagine you have a hiding rule that's based on the value of a certain attribute. But that attribute's value can change
Right.
based on other selections the user makes.
Got it.
If you don't have auto-update enabled, the hiding rule might not trigger correctly.
Because it's not getting the updated value of the attribute.
Right.
So it's like the hiding rule is stuck in the past.
Exactly.
It's not seeing the present.
So auto-update is crucial for making sure dynamic hiding works as intended.
Got it. So it's like those stock tickers you see
Yeah.
that are constantly updating with the latest prices.
Yeah, it's such a good analogy.
You need that real-time flow of information
Precisely.
to make informed decisions.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Anything else in the notes?
Let me see. Yes. There's also a really interesting note about how associated recommendation rules aren't automatically updated when their parent hiding rule is modified.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So if you make a change to the hiding rule, you need to manually update the associated recommendation rule as well.
Exactly.
That's a bit of a gotcha.
It is something to keep in mind. But, even with that little quirk, I think the combination of hiding rules and recommendation rules is a really powerful tool.
I agree. It's like having a dynamic duo, working together to create a truly streamlined and user-friendly configuration experience.
Precisely. It's interesting that you mentioned that because there's actually a note in the document about that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it talks about how groups visually collapse when all the attributes within them are hidden.
Oh, that's cool. So if a group is empty because all of its attributes are hidden,
Right.
it just kind of disappears.
Exactly. It folds in on itself.
Oh, I see. So it's like decluttering the interface,
Precisely.
making sure things stay nice and organized.
It's all about creating that seamless and intuitive user experience.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm a user and I'm going to do this configuration process, I don't want to see a bunch of empty groups. It just adds visual noise.
Right. Exactly.
So this is a really elegant way of handling that.
And it highlights the fact that these rules aren't just about functionality. They're also about the overall user experience.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like those little details that you might not even notice consciously,
No.
but they make a big difference in how you feel about using the system.
Exactly.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about configuration hiding rules.
I think so too.
We've got through the basics, explored some of the more advanced concepts, and even touched on some of the potential pitfalls to watch out for.
It's been a pretty comprehensive deep dive.
It really has.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I've learned a lot. I went from feeling a bit intimidated by these rules to actually being excited to start using them.
That's great to hear.
So for all of our listeners out there, I hope you found this deep dive as enlightening as I have. Configuration hiding rules might seem a bit complex at first, but as we've seen, they're actually a really powerful tool for creating user-friendly and efficient systems.
Absolutely.
So if you're working on any kind of configuration process, I highly recommend checking out the documentation and exploring how you can use these rules to improve your own systems.
It's definitely worth the effort.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into configuration hiding rules.
My pleasure.
And until next time, stay curious and keep learning.